SADOFF, e-cycling and data destruction, and WIPFLI. Thank you again to those sponsors for making these sessions a reality. I would like to now welcome to the stage, where do you go? I saw a second ago. There you are, right in front of me. Gerard, Senior Business Developer at WIPFLI and Amplify Consortium member who will be facilitating our panel discussion. Joe.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate that. Good morning. I am Joe Gerard, as Michael mentioned, and I'm excited to facilitate this distinguished panel of cybersecurity experts. I'm definitely not the expert. I'm just good at asking questions, I guess. We're very fortunate to have these individuals bring their wealth of knowledge to the panel. So, starting on this end, we have Tanner Londo, who's a cybersecurity account executive with Arctic Wolf. After that, we have Chad Hayes, the CTO and Director of SADOFF e-recycling and data destruction. Next to him, we have Todd HEINZ, who's the Director of Enterprise Security Risk Practice at HEARTLAND Business Systems, or HBS, right? Jeremiah Spool, next to him, District Manager of Managed IT at Impact Networking, formerly with Innova, just merged in, 6 months ago? Around there, okay. Glad to have Jeremiah here. And then Tom Wachowski, who I know fairly well, since he all scores the same name tag as I do. Tom's a director at WIPFLI out of our Milwaukee office with our cyber technology and management practice. So, Brett's not here. I wanted to thank Brett for thoroughly depressing us for the first hour. Is he in the back? Okay. So if you're a therapist who specializes in cyber, I think you've got a target-rich audience here today. All right, so got some questions here. I think some of them, I was taking some good notes because we maybe should have teamed up with the previous panel. We had a few questions that were answered. We'll expand on a few of those, and that'll allow us to ask some of the other questions that we may have to. So maybe for the entire panel, I mean, what are, other than some of the trends that we saw, like the reduction in people who were in cybersecurity, which I found very eye-opening, 85% of people getting out of that business altogether. And obviously better equipped bad guys, as Brett liked to say. What are some of the biggest trends that you see in you all work with various different size manufacturers, small business, retail. What are some of the trends that you see right now in cybersecurity that this audience would hear about?
Sure, I'll go. I guess from a small manufacturer, a small company-owned, family-owned business, it's different nowadays. I mean, cybersecurity is number one. Our owners understand it. From an IT perspective, in a small business, it's a challenge. We have constrained resources, we have constrained environment. It was nice to hear the last panel saying that Wisconsin has a incident response team for government agencies, schools, and things like that. A lot of you here with small businesses, we don't have that. I think reaching out and making the networking that we have here with WIPFLI, with all of our partners like HEARTLAND, we rely on our partners, and our partners become our friends in those types of situations. Cybersecurity is a tough thing. It's a tough nut for every company, in fact, but a small business is even harder. Resources, like I said, are very constrained. In our organization, our IT team is made up of 4 people, me included. So, other than running around making sure everything's running, doing all our upgrades, making sure documentation, which is usually the last of the primary list, because everybody an IT hates documentation. It's really hard to keep things rolling. So I thank WIPFLI, I thank everybody here. The networking opportunity we have as small business to meet one another. I think one really great thing is that we can all get together as small business and form a consortium that would actually build an incident response team to help one another out, because you feel alone, and I can't even imagine what it would be like to be in an incident. And the first thing you want to do is go to your IT people and say, we have an incident. They already know, and they're running around with heads off and trying to figure it out. So I think the biggest thing is, and I've been talking to Todd here, is helping small businesses develop an incident response plan that's easy to implement and easy to train to. We don't have a lot of time because we're constantly busy just keeping the organization running. So I think that would to me, that's number one in our goal, is to get that incident response plan, get it out there, and make sure we understand it. So that's the big trend I see.
One of the other big trends that we're seeing right now, the insurance carriers finally woke up to the risk of ransomware, and there's been a huge increase in the rigor they're putting into new applications and renewals. There's a 300% increase in premiums, and there's new requirements for multi-factor authentication on all remote access, and as well as internal privileged accounts and endpoint detection response utilities on all your workstations and endpoints. Those are new requirements that all the major carriers are putting in place to even get a policy renewed. You've got to be able to demonstrate those. And that's presented a lot of challenges for some small and mid-sized organizations that did not have those security safeguards in place previously.
Absolutely. To add on what Tom had shared, and actually Brett had touched on, not only is the insurance industry right now really making small businesses put some of those controls in place, but where it's going is federal regulation. Something that Brett had mentioned is, well, as the CISO in an organization coming in and trying to tell the executive why they need to listen to this, he said, well, because your butt's going to be in jail if you don't. And I don't know if any of you guys picked up on that, but what he was talking about, what Brett was referring to, is that the federal government has been talking about making executives in organizations liable for cyber incidents within their organizations, or the damages that they might do to other organizations or businesses that they work with. So I think federal regulation is right around the corner, and could have some pretty deep implications across the SMB space.
Yeah, and I think the number I saw is if that does go through, 75% of CEOs by 2024 will in one way or another be held personally liable for security breaches. Think about that number for a second.
And maybe I'll add on to this. So from our perspective, as Heartland, we serve several thousand customers throughout the Midwest. And part of what our team does is we take on incident response cases, literally several a day. We do hundreds each year with ransomware and email compromises and everything else. And here's what we see. So we got the wake-up call from the insurance company that Tom brought up, and Jeremiah brought up, regulation that's driving it. If you're a defense contractor, you've got things like CMMC that are pulling you. There's a tremendous pull for people or organizations to get what I would call governance over their IT department. Typically what we see is that owners of small businesses defer a lot of security to the IT department. And security by itself is a lot bigger than devices and configurations. It gets into culture, it gets into policies, procedures, and behavior and risk. By the way, only senior management can own risk. You can't delegate that to other folks, if you will. And so what I'm seeing happening across our customer base is a shift from, hey, I think over the years we've been collecting pretty good technology. And by the way, I think you'll hear a lot of cybersecurity professionals. I know our team says that most groups that we do incident response on, they have adequate technology to have stopped or done some countermeasure to prevent, either prevent altogether or at least limit the damage that was ultimately had. It's not devices, it's not IT as much anymore. It's becoming far more an issue of operational issues. You've got the logs, no one's looking at them. You've got the equipment, they're not configured. You've got a lot of things going on. It's more of an operational issue, and that's what governance is meant to, address and work on. So I'm seeing a tremendous shift because of these pressures, where instead of the IT trying to push security up through the organization, we're seeing a lot of reasons why senior management and owners and boards are involved, and it's coming down. And I think that's going to have more of a governance effect rather than just an IT effect on security.
Thanks, Tom. So, Brett touched on this a little bit earlier, and so I'm a business owner, and I have an IT department, and they assure me, and I think somebody else mentioned it, trust but verify, that we're all buttoned up on cybersecurity. I think when we do pen tests, I think the more confident they are about us not being able to get in, the more surprised they are when we get in an average of, what is it, Tom, 17 seconds or 17 minutes or whatever it is that get control of their systems.
It won't go 17 seconds, but
17 minutes.
sometimes it goes quicker.
Sometimes quicker. But so if I'm on, so maybe this is for Jeremiah to start with. So how do you, or should I be looking for outside resources to kind of help me with that? Again, the trust but verify, but how would I go about understanding what my blind spots are, I guess you could say, with your IT department and outside resources?
Yeah, I think, Brett provided us a lot of really good information, starting with an assessment, understanding where you're at. I think you did a great job of simply saying that it is an operational issue. There's been a lot of cyber responsibility that has been put on an IT department, and understanding the differences of what is necessarily operational security versus cybersecurity. Those can really mean two different things, and cybersecurity is going to mean something different to anyone. I struggle to think that anyone is really going to possess all of the skills needed to try to, be resilient to a cyber threat. It's going to take a team, and that team is likely not going to exist within your four walls. So whether or not you partner with an organization like any of us up here, or you're just getting involved within the community, there's a tremendous amount of resources, and I'll say a tremendous amount of resources that go untapped. So the more that you can get out into the community, and just try to learn from your peers, I think that's the best place to start.
Maybe if I could just echo some, or reinforce some concepts there. When we're engaged by an organization to validate that their security is where management thinks it is, and we're brought in to do a penetration test, there's a couple of things that are key things to point out from you guys as a buyer of those services. We see a lot of organizations that say, oh, I've got a proposal for a penetration test, and really when you get under the covers of that, it's just a vulnerability scan. You've got to understand the difference between a passive vulnerability scan and an attempt to actively exploit those vulnerabilities and see if you can gain unauthorized access in the network. They're different scopes, they're different procedures. You really got to understand the difference there. The other big thing that we run into a lot of times is management will like to restrict the scope or put handcuffs on the penetration testers, and they'll eliminate certain threat models or attacks from the scope of the engagement. Say, you can't do social engineering against my employees because nobody falls for that stuff. And they'll want to say you can't do these things as part of the test. And that just weakens the real world parallels. So the bad guys aren't going to be nice and protect your accounting team during a month-end close. That's when they know you're busy. That's when they know the pressures are hot, and they're going to come in then. So you got to think through those real world scenarios and try to replicate that when you are trying to test and evaluate your security. So you really can't eliminate certain threats.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that too. I mean, penetration tests are a critical part of the security posture, but then think about how are you monitoring that continuously. Penetration tests are great for, like, if you do them annually, once a quarter, however frequently you're running them, but what happens day to day or between that period of your first test and your second test. So making sure that you're taking those steps to have more of a continuous monitoring of your environment to understand where those real-time vulnerabilities are, so you can address those proactively before you get into a bigger issue. And also just getting back to your question about, should I hire a cybersecurity professional? Obviously, it would be a great step if everyone had the money and the budget and could find the people with the right skills and talent and get them to stick around, right? They're oftentimes chasing bigger paychecks or whatever it may be. But you also got to remember, if you hire one cybersecurity professional, what are you going to do? Chain them to their desk and have them work 24/7, 365? You got to have a team of people, and that's where kind of get into the first question of the shift in the cybersecurity industry. Companies and executives are opening their minds more to that shift and understanding that we need to start engaging with vendors that have teams of people that cover different things at different times of the day to really bolster and harden our security posture, because just hiring one person is just a band-aid fix to a much larger issue.
And I'll say one other, I think, important piece, as Tom and Jeremiah already mentioned, it's not just getting the right scope on a penetration test and understanding a definition of what it is, but we do a lot of annual risk assessments. And one of the things on risk assessment is penetration testing or vulnerability assessment or something else. And you'd be surprised, I mean, how often we come back year after year and they got this very nice report of all the vulnerabilities, and a lot of times organizations don't do hardly much with it. It becomes a big paperweight. I think for some folks, it's overwhelming. They don't know how to make a roadmap out of all of those, vulnerabilities that might be found. They might take a whack at a couple of the low level, but they don't put it into a risk management process where it's rinse and repeat every time. It's like, here's a product, it was a project, the project's done, so it goes away a little bit faster. A lot of groups do, but that is a problem where the risks actually don't do anything once they're identified.
It's a journey, not a project, right?
So Todd, let's stay on that topic for a second. I was at a conference in Minneapolis a week or two ago for cyber, and one of the CEOs said, look, people are coming into my office and explaining the budgets, and I want to buy robots, and they want to put this money into cyber, which a lot of business owners and board members are looking at this as a pure expense, until he had to pay $1.9 million out of pocket to get his $200 million business back up and running. Actually had a $5 million ransom tag. So maybe Tanner, I'll start with you. So I guess besides that, why else what do we have to do to wake up the business owners to these realizations that it's not that that's more of a cost of doing business and not really just a sunk expense? I guess what advice would you give these business owners that are being proposed, like you talked about before, to invest in cyber?
Yeah, I mean, it's an issue. I think there's a gentleman over here that asked that of the last panel, right? How, as IT professionals, you understand the risk, and how do you get the C-level on the board to really understand that? And I guess, unfortunately, but fortunately, there's more and more breaches happening every day, and that's waking a lot of board members and C-level executives up. I think the FBI, when they released their Internet Crime Report, organizations of 250 employees or less were breached 57% more in 2021, first half of 2021 than they were in the first half of 2020. So it's an eye-opening statistic that a lot of business owners used to think, hey, I'm too small, why would anybody want to attack me? I've got nothing worth, stealing here. In reality, they're realizing you probably haven't made the investment in cybersecurity, so it's easier to get into your environment. Yeah, maybe the ransom or the amount I get from you is smaller, but if I do that rinse and repeat all day, every day, I can make a pretty penny doing that. And so it's, as more breaches happen, unfortunately, that would cause a lot of owners to open up. I think the insurance piece is another big component that we're seeing driving a ton of conversation. So if you're talking to your ownership and they aren't aware, or maybe you're not involved in your cyber insurance renewal process, bringing that up to them and showing them the requirements that are going from, hey, this wasn't a requirement 2 years ago. Last year it was like a self-attest type of thing. Now they want to see hard evidence of the investment made. Otherwise, we risk losing this coverage or X, Y, and Z. Those are some powerful motivators for those conversations. And then I think Tom or Jeremiah mentioned it earlier, but more and more we're seeing legislation being proposed and things like that to hold board members and executives personally liable, whether that's from a financial standpoint or potential jail time, depending on kind of the scope and extent of the breach. And so you can bring these things to them. We've had a lot of conversations in the past couple of weeks where I've mentioned that the Gartner article about the 75% of board members and stuff being held liable, and that's opened a lot of doors and a lot of conversations recently. So I think bringing that kind of data to them and showing them hard numbers of, especially like let's say you're a manufacturing company, right? Do an exercise where you can point to, hey, if we're down 24 hours, it costs our business $1 million, and speak to them in terms of wallet share, and it's a little bit easier to shift that conversation that way.
I'll jump in and just simply say it comes down to education. Leaders in organizations are obviously going to receive information differently, and you just need to educate them in a way that hopefully you have awareness as to how to approach that person and provide them some education on why this is something that they should be concerned about, whether that is future regulation from the federal government in saying that you're going to be personally liable, whether you can actually bring something that helps them understand how that might impact the P&L, something that is going to hook them, and just simply educate them on where that risk is within the business.
I can tell you,
working at SADOFF and working with the ownership there, the wallet share thing is the number one thing. Being a family-owned business, been in business since 1947, they don't want to see their business fail. Seeing what's happening out in the industry, seeing what's happening in the state of Wisconsin, other manufacturers in our business getting hit and seeing what the monetary cost is to them, that has really woken up, those owners at that level, who say, okay, we really need to pay attention to this. But coming in and saying I need to spend, $300,000 on a solution because this may happen, that's not really it's not gonna make them okay. You have to show this is what we can do now. It's a journey. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. We're going through a data security framework right now. I think every company should understand that. Like last panel said, know where your data is, what it is, why it's there, and what you're keeping. Most ownership, most CEOs don't understand that. That's why they have you in place as IT leaders, is to manage that. But your job also is to prevent them and to show them the risk of what that is. So that's huge.
I think to summarize kind of what you said, there is an emotional intelligence component when you have these conversations, because especially being like a family-run business, for example, I talk to a lot of owners where, during the height of the pandemic last year, to me it's like, I'm focused on trying to provide a cybersecurity solution. So I'm like, how can you not be spending this money and doing these things? Not realizing, hey, this is the owner of a family-owned business. They've had this business for 30 years. The owner likely has been paying stuff out of pocket to try and not, lay people off or do whatever. They have to make a really tough decision on where they allocate their budget. So it's not just as simple as saying, like, you'd be dumb to not make this investment, right? You have to their points, bring the data, educate them, and really approach it from that kind of emotional intelligence aspect when you have these conversations.
All right, thank you, everyone. Let's pivot a little bit. I know there's a lot of companies who do business with, or may want to do business with, the Department of Defense or government, of course. So maybe Todd, I'll start with you, because there's been some changes recently, so maybe people aren't even aware it's been within the last 2 weeks. But let's talk a little bit about the cyber maturity model, the CMMS, and really what it is. So just give an overview in lay terms.
Yeah, if we had this conference 2 weeks ago, we might have had a different conversation about it. So the cybersecurity model, maturity model certification that the Department of Defense has been trying to facilitate for its industrial base, started to gain a lot of traction. So there was a version 1.0, and it was getting people ready for what was coming. And that what was coming was you had to be compliant with a framework, NIST 800-171. It's not that important, but it has a bunch of controls. And then they added 20 more on top of it. And then the kicker was, not only do you have to have a checkbox, like do you have MFA, it's you have a policy that governs MFA, you have a procedure that governs MFA, and can you show me evidence that you've been doing it and training on for the last 6 months? That's the maturity part of the cybersecurity maturity model. And that caused a lot of consternation. We work with an awful lot, tons and tons of small businesses who manufacture a widget for some of our big primes here in Oshkosh and up the way a little bit. And they, first of all, documentation for them was a stretch to begin with. But it's not just documentation that this maturity model is bringing out. And incidentally, where I think you're going to see more cybersecurity requirements. I think the insurance industry, from what I talk to folks on, they want to be more mature than what they are, but to go from a fairly benign questionnaire 2 or 3 years ago to a lot more and adding more and more as you go along, like you have to have a business continuity plan, right? That's the maturity part that I think is where you're going to be driven to. It's not just you have some devices and you have them configured a certain way, it's and have an architecture, it's showing that governance and that maturity. So the CMMC was really mandating that. A lot of consternation for a lot of small companies to try to get to that level. Several customers that after they saw what it was about said, we're not going to be doing any kind of work with the Department of Defense as a result. It's cheaper for us to not take on this contract than it is to become compliant with this. Everybody has to be compliant with this framework by, it's a moving target, but like 2026. Well, last Friday, they came out and they dropped some of the requirements in terms of what controls were added to it, and they dropped the maturity model. And so when you talk about what risk is in an organization, risk is weighing a lot of things. It's not just hearing the 300 things that you need to do to become, have security in your organization. It's how does that weigh against our budget and our culture and our customers and all other things that when we add it together have to be part of senior management's decision and essentially working with risk. And the Department of Defense basically found that customers or some manufacturers were either putting up a big fuss or were just saying that they weren't going to participate. That adds risk to our nation's security. So they redid some of the steps, and it's a lighter version. It still adds a lot of teeth to what anybody who worked with the Department of Defense is. And well, I will say that after the SolarWinds incident that happened earlier in the year, other agencies are adopting CMMC as well. It's not just the Department of Defense, but you're going to see more and more. And so it's going to be, anytime you do work not only directly with the government, but with companies that you're supporting in support of contracts that they have, you're going to have proof of more maturity. And I think that's going to be a trend. So I'll stop there, but there's a lot that is inferred with CMMC for customers that are under that mandate.
There's a couple of other big changes within CMMC, and I've got mixed opinions on this. As a security practitioner standpoint, I think that CMMC 2.0 in general is a huge downgrade in overall security. That said, CMMC 2.0 makes it significantly easier for small and mid-sized manufacturers and construction companies to comply with the requirements. So the dropping the maturity model is a huge component. It's going to make it a lot easier to maintain. But to get the initial certification, the DoD has also dropped the third-party audit requirement for almost all companies in the defense industrial base. I've seen some numbers. Originally, we're talking about 300,000 organizations, maybe a little bit more, that needed an external certification of all those controls that you mentioned. Now the projections are somewhere in the 20 to 30,000 company range. So they're coming up with new criteria to say if the contract is not critical to national security, they're going to waive the certification, the external certification requirement, and allow self-assessment, which is significantly more hurdle for organizations to get through. The other massive change in CMMC 2.0 is to allow compliance via a POAM, Plan of Action and Milestones. In CMMC 1.0, it was 100% compliance threshold. You had to meet every single safeguard in order to get your certification. With 2.0, they will be establishing a minimum baseline, a score that you have to hit, and then any low priority controls, once you've met that score, you can address with a POAM. Now, a POAM can't live in perpetuity. You've got to say, I'm working on it, I have a milestone set up for it, but it allows management flexibility to continue to work on those controls and still be awarded contracts.
And from a compliance perspective, whether you're in the manufacturing space, whether you're in the healthcare space, don't think that because you're in one of those industries that you don't have to do anything yet. Federal regulation is coming. So again, if it's not knocking on your door, I think it's fair to say that it's coming down the street.
Yeah, we're from a regulation standpoint, Homeland Security and Department of Energy are the other two agencies that are at the forefront of trying to adopt something like CMMC for their contractors and suppliers. From a financial services standpoint, or specifically thinking about insurance, there's the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. They've got their cybersecurity model law, which is now in process of being implemented by every state in the country. I think there's 13 to 18 that have implemented state-specific versions. Wisconsin is one of them. But this law is rolling out requirements for anybody who's licensed to sell and broker insurance within the state to have cybersecurity programs and requirements met within the organization. So there's all sorts of regulatory pressures that everybody's trying to drive on us in the absence of a national law. A lot of headaches out there.
So, Chad, we heard a little bit earlier about incident response planning. But we also know about business continuity planning and disaster recovery. How do those things relate to, let's say, small businesses? Those three items.
Well, speaking of small business, I'm sure you guys can all relate. Everything's a disaster. Everything's an incident. So having an incident response plan or disaster plan or a business continuation plan nowadays, it's a business continuation plan. You need to have a business continuation plan no matter what. In my experience, 25 years, it's always started out as a disaster. Something happens, you have to do this. Then it turned into a business continuation plan. Now you have data security, now it's an incident response plan. But they all basically form the same thing, bringing the team together to address an action that happened. One thing in my personal experience that I've had with my previous employers and this one now is, what do you do in a downtime procedure? IT can do a lot of things. We can try to solve the problem on the infrastructure, but it's getting the team together and having a plan, not just in IT, but from operations to logistics to sales reps to accounting. What are you going to do when your systems are down? What do you do? Is there a plan? And that, from my experience, has been the hardest thing to get across in my organization. Going to all these department heads, all these vice presidents, saying, listen, you've got to put together a plan. Submit your plan, and then we're going to test to it. Because I've had people come up to me and say, listen, if the system's down, I can't send out a truck to pick up equipment, pick up material. I'm like, why not? You have a phone, they've got keys to the trucks, they can go get them. Well, we can't report it. There's things to do, and it's just getting people to sit there and have these brainstorming sessions, have these training sessions, these roundtable sessions to say, what can we do? It's getting people to think outside that box of, we have an incident, let's figure out what type of incident we have and what we're going to do. IT can build theirs, but every department needs to have that in place as well. But building that incident response or business continuation plan, because your business continuation plan is going to kick in when you have an incident, period, because your systems are going to be down or compromised. So you got to have something that's going to continue the business. So doing those tabletop exercises, getting everybody on board is key.
I would like to add what Chad shared, that incident response planning is not something that should happen just within the four walls of IT. It really needs to involve the organization as a whole. Because again, this comes down to solving issues of risk within a business, right? And I will say that most organizations that I work with, if they're looking at a cybersecurity model, they're usually, where they have the most maturity is in some of the identify and detect side of a model. And it's in the recovery side where I think they really fail the most. And it's in the recovery side where humans are needed the most in order to help the organization out. So if I could encourage all of you here to take some time and effort, really look at how will you recover from a threat when it happens. Obviously, it's not a matter of if, it is just simply a matter of when.
This is like the book up on the shelf that you hope you never need, right? But you're probably going to need it. So I guess a follow-up to that would be, should you include your customers and your suppliers in that? Again, talking within the four walls, there's a lot of people, if your business shuts down, they don't even have the phone number to call, let's say, their key customers. Should you involve them up front during that planning stage?
Whether or not to invite them, whether they will participate or not, I think it's been echoed here in the other panels that it's just important to know who those contacts are and how to get a hold of them. If you're not available to be able to reach out to those individuals, to those key contacts, that resource should be available for the rest of your team. That information should be shared. So at the very least, and reaching out to those contacts and developing that relationship up front before you're knocking on their door when your hair is on fire, asking for help.
Because one of the key things we look at, or I personally look at, is we partner with HEARTLAND, we partner with CDW, we have a lot of partners that we deal with, but part of our incident response plan so that our IT folks can focus on things is bringing them in. Can you help us in putting that, not a retainer, but something like a retainer in place? If we have an incident, how can you help? Can you bring resources to bear? Because having 3 people in IT is just not enough to solve this problem. So we need other resources, and those resources can bring other resources to bear. The biggest thing is to admit that you're not going to be able to solve the problem on your own. Especially in IT, it's a hard thing for us to admit. We need help. So it's one thing that I've had to train my staff, train myself over the years, that you can't fix everything. So admit that you have your own limitations and you're going to need help. And finding those partners is huge.
So Todd, I heard on the earlier panel, even some discussions out in the audience on limited resources internally. People are doing a good job trying to get their incident response plans and DR plans together, but I've also heard we review it once a year, or we try and get to it once a year, but maybe we don't have time. In a perfect world, maybe Todd, how often should companies be revisiting these plans? Barring any, let's say, an incident that happens where forces do to kind of reevaluate it, but on a regular basis, how often should they be doing this?
Well, first of all, it's the mentality that's part of the culture. It's baked into the process. Just like security isn't the thing you do at the end of creating something or building something. It's baked in from the beginning and works all the way through. It's the journey. It's not the the end result. And so business continuity is really a year-long effort. It goes with the idea of, yes, you do have tabletops, and they might be scheduled annually. You should certainly review your policy formally annually. Sometimes whenever there's a change, you get a major change in your infrastructure, that might cause it a review earlier. But it's at least annually, tabletops annually, but more importantly, it's things that you do throughout the year that are baked into everything that you do. For example, part of a business continuity plan and resiliency is maybe people working from home. And if they come to the office now, there are ways that you can test, or at least without making it a big deal, start to ensure that you've got the things in place that allow people to work from home, whether it's policy related, whether it's IT support related, defining what they can and can't do. I mean, there's a lot of things that you can bake into everyday stuff that really is tied to continuity. And if you build a culture that starts to see it, it's basically identifying risk and finding ways to deal with it. Just about everybody does that every day in some form or another. It's just that they're not tied together. The idea that you've got all the dots out there, but nobody's connecting them. It's really putting a framework around what a lot of people do. So that's what I would say.
I know there's M&A, mergers and acquisitions, is a big deal right now. Somewhat related to the disaster recovery and those sorts of topics. But Tanner, I'll start with you. But one of the newer, when people are doing due diligence, they want to find out what the financials look like. They want to find out what the safety looks like. They want to find out if there's union contracts. But what the heck is cyber diligence, and why should people be aware of this?
Sure, yeah. So, cyber diligence, you're probably all familiar at least with the concept, right? It's just the process of understanding where your risks are and then addressing those. As it relates to M&A activity, one of the things that we see a lot is that as companies are acquiring another company, evaluating that company's security posture and their environment to see what threats might be in there that they don't even know about is something that gets overlooked a lot of times. At Arctic Wolf, 70% of our new customers that we bring on have some sort of a latent threat in their environment. So something that got in, passed in perimeter defenses, they had no idea was there. And we find that typically within the onboarding process. So if you think about that across these other businesses, if you're a company that's acquiring another company and you kind of just trust the knowledge transfer between the IT departments that, hey, they're all good, we took a look and did a quick scan of their environment, everything's all right, without doing a deeper level of investigation, but also having that operational process ready to go in case something does present itself that you missed. That's where we're seeing a lot of these big issues. Someone mentioned Target earlier, I think we mentioned a few times. When you think about that, that was a third-party HVAC vendor that they kind of missed on the due diligence perspective that had the threat in their environment that then was able to jump into targets. So just really shoring up your own security posture before going into a merger or an acquisition, but then having the process, that operational framework and mindset behind the scenes ready to go. So in case there is something that you miss, when it does present itself, you can detect it in real time and respond to it before it becomes a much larger issue.
Yeah, a couple of just stories to share. If you think about, can that really happen? One of the worst case examples of a breach discovered after a merger activity. A couple of years ago, Marriott Hotel Corporation was in merger discussions with Starwood, and closing and acquiring Starwood was over $1 billion transaction. Shortly after that transaction closed, it was discovered that the Starwood reservation database had been compromised. It ended up costing over $120 million, I think was the price tag on that incident response. There's certainly a number like that that would have affected the economics of the deal had they known there was that risk ahead of time. So you can scale that down to our own size of organizations that we're working with. I was doing a cybersecurity due diligence evaluation on a company last year, and when we're working through the process, have you done vulnerability assessments, have you done penetration testing? These were answered in the negative, and it was a large enough concern for the acquiring company that they had paused on the deal, get some tools in, like you mentioned, see if there are indicators of compromise within that target company, then give management the opportunity to fix that so it doesn't affect the terms of the deal.
Interesting. Jeremiah, so I don't, as far as time-wise, I want to make sure, so if you have a few questions ready, we're going to get to those in a few minutes here. But Jeremiah, I know that everybody in this room wants to take away some, let's say, some actionable items. I guess what kind of advice would you give to people regarding their resiliency when it comes to cyber? Maybe resiliency isn't the right word, but it's certainly very important.
Yeah, I think that the previous panel and others have done a good job of kind of establishing what some of those are. And if I could just sum it up into one, it would just be understand where you're at. Whether you're currently active in continual assessing and understanding where you are, or you've never dove into an assessment at all, understanding where you're at is the place to start. And I'll just simply leave it with that.
Okay. I want to go back a little bit. I think Brett was the one that mentioned earlier that on average people are in your system for 200 days, I guess, before you realize it. And Tom, you just mentioned it right before this as far as, I don't know if you called it scanning tools or something to go in and check and see if it's been compromised. I guess why is that average so high, that 200 days of companies that have cyber, and what's causing that? And isn't there some simple things that people can do to find out if somebody's been in their system for a week, much less 200 days?
If they're simple, sometimes that means it's expensive, so it doesn't get budgeted. If it's difficult to do, it doesn't get done. So the logs are there, nobody's reviewing, or nobody's implemented the artificial intelligence tools that can identify that for you on a quicker pace. Good news is prices for those are getting cheaper. There's more competition in that space, and we're all benefiting from that competition.
Anybody else want to add to that?
No, I'll just say that I think Brett also mentioned that the threat landscape with the number of organized crime groups and nation states, it's not that every time that you get an advanced threat that's persistently in your environment, that they're actually waiting, that they're watching you every day. They could be. They could absolutely be gathering intelligence. But another reason that's real is there's too many to harvest. For example, like with the Exchange 0 day that came out, it infected a lot of machines. We're still cleaning up things that people are finding. And I think some of the reason is it's so prevalent that the attackers just don't get around to harvesting that company on this given day. They have to wait just like your projects line up. And so that I think is also maybe scary to think about, is that there's, the reason they're there because of intelligence gathering and some malicious intent. In other cases, you're just on a docket waiting to be harvested at some point.
That's interesting. So we talk about harvesting. So maybe Chad, I'll segue that into you. We all know how, Hunter Biden disposed of his laptop at the pawn shop. And this is really a big piece of CMMC as an entire section around it. But talk a little bit about, the importance and maybe some of the misconceptions around data destruction, because that's a huge issue right now.
So my background is I was the head of IT at SADOFF when I first came here. They had dabbled in electronics recycling since the beginning. Then they started with this division about being able to recycle electronics and IT assets, and asked me if I wanted to head up the division due to my expertise. And I said sure, as long as we make sure that data security is number one. And honestly, I've seen a lot of things in my career, and being part of some of these shows that we went to, and what people are doing with their end-of-life electronics. I mean, everybody hears I got a room or a closet full of old routers, switches, computers, laptops. It's just scary what people are doing with it and where they go. And the one thing we find out is people just don't know where to go with it, because it's end of life. They don't think about it. It's old. They don't care about it. But it's honestly one of the biggest breaches that has ever happened due to printers in a healthcare organization being retired and data being taken out of the hard drives out of all those printers. So that's something that people don't think about. You don't think about them. IT doesn't think about it when they're doing refreshes, because they got so much stuff to do that they have to get rid of the old stuff to put in the new stuff. And it's on a checklist to do. And I've been there. I've been the guy that had to sit there when I first started wiping hard drives, and you forget which ones you did, which ones you didn't do, and then it gets out into a while. Or you give it to, you find out some people just give it to their employees, or they give it to Bob in a truck to take it away. It is so easy nowadays to get data off of devices that if you're not working with a trusted vendor, you're leaving yourself open, honestly. Things that we've seen, things that we come in and evaluate, we go in and we help other customers evaluate what their end of life is. We offer all of our customers come in to see our process. I mean, we're a manufacturer, we're ISO 9000, we're certified R2, which means we have to do things a certain way, otherwise we're fine. We're working towards CMMC, we're ITAR. There's so much regulation that we have to protect you guys for what we do. It's something we hold, I hold personally, responsible. I'm very prideful of making sure that nobody's data leaves our premises. If you bring it in, it's gone, it's shredded. I mean, if you guys are okay with other ways of doing stuff, that's fine. But if it comes to us, we make sure that we take care of the data. And from what I've seen over the last 5 years of setting up SADOFF recycling data destruction, literally would blow your mind what people do with their end-of-life electronics. And the trust that they have in it's old, just take it away, I don't care. It really is, it's surprising that a lot of this stuff hasn't gotten bigger, and it's really scary. So what I would encourage you to do is reach out. It doesn't have to be to us, it can be to anybody, but please make sure that you trust them, that they are certified, that they will grant you access to see what they're doing, show you the whole process. We would welcome you to come in and take a look at us, but security on end of life is something that just by design isn't really thought of, but it really needs to be. I mean, servers are one thing. When you get rid of the servers, it's fine, but end of life assets, even when you wipe them, there's still data out there that they can be recovered if they really want to do it. And if it's a financial institution, if it's a healthcare institution, or somebody that just wants your data, they're going to find a way to get to it unless it's completely destroyed.
Joe, I just want to quickly add as well, and I think everyone up here would echo this. For any organization that is looking to partner with a vendor, go visit them on their turf. Go visit them. Go into their doors, see how they are operating. You can learn so much by just visiting that organization. It's going to be time well spent.
100%.
And I'll just make a couple other comments that I think we're seeing a lot of customers do. On one hand, if you get an audit and you have to be compliant with something, you can start knocking out all those remediation issues and trying to be compliant. A couple of shortcuts. One is you can shrink your environment. Common is with PCI for credit cards. Instead of you holding that data in your environment, you put it off on your merchant transaction provider, right? The same is true with CMMC. It's only interested for the most part in where controlled unclassified information exists. Well, the smaller you have that footprint, the less you have to do on your environment. So instead of trying to get your whole environment to be compliant, shrinking what's important, either for compliance purposes or your own sensitive data makes a big deal. And the other is, talking up here as MSPs for the most part. For CMMC, for example, the price tag to be compliant with everything that needs to be is pretty large for a lot of companies. They really are aghast at it. Well, in addition to shrinking the environment, another shortcut is you can knock off a lot of controls by getting Arctic Wolf and having managed detection and response. It knocks off a lot of log watching and a bunch of other controls in that neighborhood. The same is true with trying to make your files encrypted and safe. You can essentially get an encrypted enclave, meaning somebody else is taking the responsibility to be FedRAMP certified. I'm not suggesting those two particular things, but I'm saying look out. It's not just partnering where somebody comes and provides something and you're doing it. By shrinking the environment and offloading responsibility, there's a lot that you can make ground on in terms of security. As an option.
Offloading risk, right?
Exactly.
Okay, time check. Rob hasn't come to yell at me yet, but we got about 5 minutes. Any questions from the audience for our esteemed panel? A lot of different topics. I think we probably had 20 questions we didn't get to, so we could be up here a couple more hours. But any questions? Yes, sir.
I have a recycling question from a personal standpoint, not corporate. Would you trust Best Buy to do your recycling of your home electronics?
That's a loaded question. So basically, when you bring in your electronics to us, basically it's just destroyed. If we don't look at it, we pull the drive, shred the drive, it's done. I'm not sure what Best Buy does, but I know if they can find something that's not kosher, it is reported, which should.
They tape it up and put it on the clearance.
That too. So I'm sure, I know they are not R2 certified. They do partner with other electronic recyclers in the industry. So whether it's getting recycled at your, I'm guaranteeing it's not getting recycled at that store, but it's probably going to a third party that's being recycled.
Chad, do each of your locations offer the ability for consumers to bring products to
Yes.
your? Okay.
Yes. So we have 2 facilities within the United States, one in Oshkosh and one in La Vista, Nebraska, that are R2 certified, basically data destruction certified. Our other facilities, you can bring in your material, it is secured, and then it's transferred to one of our facilities, either Oshkosh or La Vista. And that's where all the data destruction happens. So all of our sites are monitored, secured, and all that. So, and then we also do takeouts and things like that too. So.
We got time for 1 or 2 more questions?
Take the
Yes,
famous breaches like Target, Facebook, PayPal, etc. Do they that ultimate information, like my information, did that get used somewhere? Am I still at risk if I have accounts with all those companies?
If I could give some advice, just assume all of your data is out there. I don't think any one of us can assume that we're not at risk. We are all at risk. And that's why being prepared for it is so important. So just assume that all of your data is out there and that you are absolutely at risk.
Well, that's comforting.
Yeah. It's the world we live in. Yeah.
There are 13-year-old kids out there taking on entire nations, so.
Quick show of hands, who had a false unemployment claim submitted on their behalf in the past year? So yeah, your data has been used.
All right, one last question. Who's got the finale here?
Is this regulation good?
The CMMC or?
Cybersecurity regulation in general. Earlier, that our ports were being blocked from electronic vehicle regulation. What kind of negative impacts would like this have on our economy?
Well, I'll say
Or is
that.
it because finally business owners care?
They're starting to care more.
Right. I would say that we didn't talk about the cybersecurity maturity model. And at the lowest end, it is really blocking and tackling. Even if you're really good at IT stuff, if all you're focused on is IT, we're not talking about folks who don't have a firewall, that they're blocking and tackling. The most sophisticated IT could still be blocking and tackling. Because all IT security does, if you will, is, handle that rather narrow, but extremely important. It's the tip of the spear, it's the foundation. But unless you're putting in other aspects, other controls related to social engineering, related to administrative controls, things related to your third-party vendors and partners, until those are addressed, you automatically have holes no matter how good your IT is. So to get to the next level of maturity, it's compliance-based. And that's where it's looking at frameworks. Yeah, some frameworks are more diligent and better, but it is a matter of applying and right-sizing what's appropriate for your industry, your company, where you're at in your journey. A lot of times people will start with the CIS critical controls. Used to be the top 20, now it's 18, right? But then find out that, okay, that was a good starting point, and then they might move up to a NIST version or something higher and higher. So overall, CMMC was positioned 2 weeks ago to be one of the more mature, right along with HIPAA and other pretty controlled environments because of that maturity. Now it's been downgraded, but it still is far better than any kind of blocking and tackling. It's still a very strong framework and standard. So if you're not adopting some kind of standard, you automatically are in the blocking and tackling area. And you're automatically have a lot of the holes that you've been hearing horror stories about. Most ransomware comes through eBay, right? So you have the best IT security, the best filtering, and all you need is the receptionist or the CEO or somebody in between to click on something to bypass it all. That's part of the other controls besides IT. And what's happening is IT's been kind of made to administer those controls. And okay, it might not be a stretch to do user awareness training, although it still may be a stretch for a lot of IT shops to fully get it adopted. But then when you start looking at all the other controls, they're not equipped to do it. It's got to be an organizational being brought down. That's why governance is really one of the big things that needs to happen to mature your environment.
And I'll add as well that, is it important? Yeah, it's a matter of our national economic vitality, right? That's absolutely vital. I forgot what else I was going to say related to the federal regulation, but it's absolutely needed, and some people think that it's a necessary evil, but again, it's coming. It's right around the corner, and it's a matter of protecting our nation's economic value, in my opinion.
I'll just say one last thing. CMMC was adopted because of national security. That's why it was put in place, because of a need for to address the gap in national security.
Yeah, I mean, we're all in this together, right? From a cybersecurity standpoint. So is federal regulation, too much caffeine, good in this capacity? I think so, because now it's starting to force organizations to make the investment in cybersecurity. Where you might think, hey, if my company gets attacked, it's just my company, whatever. But look at who you're tied to. If you're in the supply chain attacks are going up, pretty aggressively, right? So what could the impact of the breach on your company have on all these other companies? And we start to think in that capacity and understand that our nation's cybersecurity is a team approach, that we all need to be taking these measures. And then you start to think, okay, it's something that hasn't been required in the past. Now that federal regulation is starting to make it more of a requirement, it's only going to help strengthen all of us, right, as we defend against these nation states and these international adversaries.
A team they were outnumbered 12-1 on, so it's probably more than that. That's just for one country. So, all right, we're going to wrap up. Rob, sorry I didn't finish right on time, but I just wanted I know everybody in cyber is extremely busy and probably got a big pile of emails and phone calls waiting for you when you get back to your office. So thank you very much to this panel. It's been very informative. I now want to bring Michael back up to the stage, and he'll be leading us directly into our next session, which will feature an introduction of the new Uw-Oshkosh Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, which is located on the second level of this building, followed by a tour of the facility as we head into our final luncheon session, featuring Speaker Brian Franz from the FBI. So thank you very much.